I'm clock specialist Gary Sullivan. I'm here at the Willard House and Clock Museum in North Grafton, Massachusetts, the home of the famous Willard family of clockmakers. I'd like to show you an exhibit of 38 musical tall case clocks. This unprecedented exhibit includes approximately 1/3 of the early American musical and quarter chiming clocks that are known to survive. Most tall case clocks from the period incorporate two winding holes, one for the hour strike and one for the time portion of the mechanism. This clock has three because it's a musical clock. That third winding hole operates the musical apparatus. Many of these musical clocks play a selection of tunes. They may play from 1 to 10 different tunes, and often those tunes are named on the dial. Here we have the names of the 6 different tunes that the clock plays and the selector to choose between one and another. Here's a 6-tune musical movement that we've got displayed on a stand so we can see how it operates. I'll wind up the music train a little bit. Here we see a typical musical movement with the 11 bells and the 11 hammers that strike them. We see the pin barrel here with these small pins that come around and actuate the hammers and make them play the tune. This is set to play a tune called Rakes of Rodney. Let's hear what it sounds like. The 8 clocks in this gallery are all related. They belong to what I'm calling the Harland Burnap School of Clockmaking from Connecticut, begun by Thomas Harland, who arrived from England in 1773 as a trained clockmaker. He developed a particular type of musical clock movement, and he trained his apprentices how to make it. They in turn trained their apprentices how to make it. And here we have an example of a clock with works by Thomas Harland. It plays 6 tunes and also has this moon phase dial, which is a nice feature on a musical clock. Here we have an example by his apprentice, Daniel Burnap, who became America's most prolific maker of musical clocks with 15 examples known. It's in a classic Connecticut case with this so-called whale's tail fretwork, but it's a special example being made of mahogany. Typically, a Connecticut clock of this period would have a cherry case. And here's another example, also made by Daniel Burnap. This clock actually still belongs to a descendant of the original owner, and it was purchased in 1794 for 27 pounds. It plays 6 tunes and has a moon phase dial. Here's another 6-tune example, also made by Daniel Burnap. The original consumer for this clock was from Charleston, South Carolina. Here we have a classic Connecticut case, wonderful old surface, cherry case, with works by John Avery from Preston, Connecticut. It's related to this group of clocks. And then we have another example by Daniel Burnap. Again, it plays 6 different tunes in a beautiful cherry Connecticut case. And I'll play the tune for you. This is a tune that in 1790 was called Hob or Nob, but today we would know it as a tune called The Campbells Are Coming or The British Are Coming, Hurrah, Hurrah. And here it is. Now we're in the main gallery where we've got clocks from several different regions and several different periods, ranging from the 1740s to about 1815 or 20 by many different makers. It's important to note that in this period, late 18th and early 19th century, very few households in America had a clock of any kind. And these musical clocks were 2 or 3 times as expensive as a standard tall case clock. So they were only within reach of the truly affluent. Now, we generally don't know the makers of the cases because they're rarely signed, but with musical clocks, they're much more likely to be signed or labeled by the cabinet maker because they were always considered to be very important objects, and they were very expensive. And here's a perfect example. This one made by Silas W Howell in New Brunswick, New Jersey. It's dated 1797. It's in this beautiful federal case, and it bears the label of the cabinet maker, Matthew Edgerton Jr. from New Brunswick, New Jersey. He thought enough of it at the time to put his label on the case. This clock plays a selection of 4 tunes, including Bunker Hill, Norwich, Williamstown, and Newton. Bunker Hill was a fiercely patriotic tune commemorating the Battle of Bunker Hill. My co-curator and co-author, Kate Van Winkle Keller, is a music historian, and this is research that she has spent her lifetime working on, and she has helped us to understand the meaning of these tunes and when they were written, who wrote them, what they're about. Moving down the line here, here's a clock made by John George Hoff, Jr. in he lived 1788 to 1822. This example plays 10 different tunes, and it's the only example we've found that shuts itself off during the sleeping hours. So between 9 p.m. and about 6 a.m., it does not play its music, which is a pretty nice feature. This is a clock made in Windsor, Vermont by Martin Cheney. It plays 7 different tunes. They're listed around the dial here, and they change automatically at around midnight from one tune to the next. Many of the early American clockmakers advertised that they made musical clocks that played 6 different tunes plus a psalm tune on Sunday. In this case, the psalm tune would have been St. Mary's. It's in a wonderful regional cherry case with very nice inlay. Here we have another clock made by John Eberman in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. This plays 5 different tunes. They are selected here with a little lever. The tunes are not named, which is typical. Many clocks don't tell you the names of the tunes, but this is in a wonderful regional walnut case made in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with this really bold pediment, a beautiful clock. And then another one here. This clock was made by Effingham Emery in New York City. It plays a selection of 6 tunes. Doesn't tell us the exact titles of the tunes, it just gives the type of tune: minuet, jig, march, and song. This case is actually stamped with the initials of what might represent the cabinet maker. The cousin of clockmaker Effingham Emery was a New York City cabinet maker named Thomas Burling. And the initials TB are found here on the door. That may represent the cabinet maker's name. I'll play this tune for you. It plays beautifully. So try to picture people getting together and singing and dancing to the tunes played by these clocks. Well, that's what they did in the 18th and early 19th century. In fact, these clocks were considered so extraordinary that people would pay to listen to them play. We found period advertisements where tavern owners would rent or borrow a musical tall case clock, and then they would advertise in the newspaper that for 3 pence or 5 pence, patrons could come to the tavern and listen to the music played by these clocks. So they were really considered extraordinary at the time. This clock plays a selection of 7 different tunes. The movement is inscribed with the name of Joseph Pope, a Boston clockmaker, and the case is attributed to Major Stephen Badlam, a well-known Dorchester, Massachusetts cabinet maker. This clock plays beautifully. I will play the tune for you. It's playing a tune called Buttered Peas. And then we have an example here of extraordinary Federal era cabinet making. The works for this clock were made by Daniel Rose in Reading, Pennsylvania. It's a locally painted Reading, Pennsylvania dial and this phenomenal inlaid Federal case. It's just a beautiful example. Here's an early clock made by Aaron Miller in Elizabethtown, New Jersey. This clock dates to 1750 to 60, a time when very few clocks were being made in this country, let alone musical clocks. This plays a single tune, and it has this wonderful Queen Anne style case with a sarcophagus top, a rare survivor. Here's a clock that belongs to the Bennington Museum in Bennington, Vermont. It was made by Nichols Goddard in Rutland, Vermont. It plays a selection of 7 tunes, including Yankee Doodle, a patriotic tune. And it has this wonderful dial or face painted in Boston with these patriotic shield motifs in the corners, and a beautiful Federal inlaid case. The next clock was made in Newport, Rhode Island. It dates to about 1775. Was made by Thomas Claggett, and it plays a selection of 2 different tunes, march and hornpipe. And this is a Newport, Rhode Island case with this wonderful Goddard Townsend School carved shell. This clock is quarter chiming and musical, and I'll play it for you. It's playing a march tune right now. Here's a clock made in Herkimer, New York by Asa Munger. It's dated 1817, and it's another one of these New England clocks that plays 7 tunes that change automatically. It has wonderful tiger maple details in the case. This clock was made by Benjamin Willard during the short time that he was in Lexington, Massachusetts, and it's signed on the dial Lexington. This is in a wonderful regional Massachusetts case with a silvered engraved brass dial. And this clock is one of only 2 known musical or quarter chiming clocks from the state of Maine. This is attributed to Paul Rogers from Berwick, Maine, and it has this rocking ship dial which moves back and forth with the motion of the pendulum, and a tiger maple case, a really special example from Maine. Here's a clock with a great story. This one was made by Benjamin Willard in Grafton, Massachusetts. It belongs to the Yale University Art Gallery, and we're thrilled to have it here in the exhibit because this clock was made, the works for it were made right here on this property. Benjamin Willard would have made the musical movement in the workshop in the other room. So this is kind of a special clock that's come back home after about 220 years of absence. This plays 7 different tunes that change automatically around midnight every night. Some of the tunes included are called New Jersey, Paddywhack, and Duke of Argyll. This clock was made by Isaac Brokaw in Bridgetown, New Jersey. It's in a case made by Matthew Edgerton Jr. It's one of two cases by that cabinet maker that we have in the exhibit, and it includes his handwritten paper label on the inside of the door. This clock belongs to the Newark Museum, and it's in a very nice Chippendale cherry case. Another clock we have here was made by Christian Eby in Manheim, Pennsylvania. It has a beautiful regional cherry case with these wonderful inlays, including a spread wing eagle inlay on the top, holding an olive branch in its mouth. It has 4 beautiful hands, typical of Pennsylvania clocks. They often have 4 hands off of the center. Let's play the music on this one for you. It plays nicely. And here we have volume control. This is a clock made by Jakob Graf in Lebanon, Pennsylvania in the 1740s, maybe 1750. So this would be one of the earliest musical tall case clocks made in America. It was a very special clock in its day. Imagine the house that this would have been in the 1740s with ceilings that high. It plays 5 different tunes and it's quarter striking in this wonderful regional walnut case. Another Pennsylvania clock here made by George Long in Hanover, Pennsylvania. This is the only comb-playing early American musical clock that we found. It has a mechanism just like a music box that plays on a tuned metal comb rather than on bells. A beautiful example in a case that has these patriotic spread wing eagle inlays on the bottom and the top here. So that was a really patriotic gesture to have those inlays on your clock. We also have an example by Caleb Wheaton, Providence, Rhode Island. This is another one of those Rhode Island clocks with a wonderful carved shell on the door. This clock plays 6 unnamed tunes. It has this beautiful brass fretwork with fabric behind it to let the sound of the music come out as the clock plays. A really special example. This clock was made by John Fisher in York, Pennsylvania. It's a mammoth clock in a beautiful walnut case with this superb engraved dial with these scenes in the corners. Sweep second hand, typical of a Pennsylvania clock. It's a beautiful movement. It plays 7 different tunes. They're all listed on the dial here. Just a great clock. The one behind me is the only Simon Willard musical tall case clock known. It's actually part of the collection of the Willard House and Clock Museum. It's our pride and joy. It plays 7 different tunes listed here with a selector, and it's also in a case attributed to Major Stephen Badlam, a Dorchester, Massachusetts cabinet maker. This clock, in a wonderful federal inlaid case, was made by the partnership of Bassett and Warford in Albany, New York. It plays 6 different tunes that are listed on this engraved gilt ring, and it has wonderful details in the case like these inlaid conch shells. Just a beautiful example of federal cabinet making. Here we have 2 New Jersey clocks. This one made by Leslie and Williams in New Brunswick, New Jersey, about 1790. It plays 6 different tunes, and as I've learned from my co-curator, Kate Keller, some of these are very patriotic tunes, including Washington's Resignation, a tune written to honor George Washington, also Bunker Hill, a tune written about the Battle of Bunker Hill, and Banks of the Dee, also a patriotic tune. This clock bears the paper label of Joseph Ward, a New Brunswick cabinet maker. So this is another one of those special musical clocks that has a label by the case maker. This clock was made just a few years earlier by Jacob Bonnell in Chatham, New Jersey. It has this slightly earlier style brass dial, but a very similar pagoda top case, similar to this one. So two nice examples of New Jersey clocks. This one playing just a single tune, which was common on a lot of the clocks that were a little bit earlier. This is the latest early American musical clock that we have found. It's done in the classical taste and dates to about 1825 or 30. But in this period, most people were buying production clocks made in Connecticut factories. So for the consumer to buy a clock from an individual clockmaker and spend the type of money that this would have cost, he was really making a statement. This is a wonderful 10-tune English musical clock. But I can demonstrate how the tunes are changed on this. It has a tune selector on the dial, 10 different tunes. And if you watch the pin barrel here, you see that as I move the tune selector, that pin barrel moves from side to side. And as I move from one tune to the next, to the next, and to the next, you'll see that it only moves about 1/8 of an inch, but each time that pin barrel moves, it brings a whole new set of pins in line with the hammers that play the bells. So it plays a completely different tune each time, and I'll play that for you right now. That was a March in Scipio. Some of the clocks in the exhibit have imported European musical and quarter chiming movements housed in their original American cases. We've got 3 examples here. The first being a wonderful clock with London quarter chiming works housed in its original Philadelphia area case. And you can see it's got extraordinary detail to the woodworking. And the cases for these clocks often incorporate the finest cabinetry found in early American furniture. The second example has works by Frederick Mollinger, Mannheim, Germany. This is a 7-tune musical movement housed in its original New York City case with ball and claw feet, a great rarity. And then the final clock has works made by William Creek in London, quarter chiming, housed in an original Newport, Rhode Island case of the Goddard Townsend School with this wonderful carved shell on the door. And this is actually a quarter chiming movement, which is different from a musical movement in that it plays a small piece of music on the quarter hours, as opposed to a musical clock that plays a recognizable tune on the hour or perhaps every 3 hours. Thanks for joining us on this tour of the Early American Musical Clocks exhibit at the Willard House and Clock Museum.